Peace, beautiful people. Welcome back to Ascension Books and Conversations. My name is Charisse Lovely, and I am here every Sunday at 10 a.m. sharing a different book. We're going to go through books together, like it's a nice little book club, and hopefully, we'll get through each book each month. And we're here to study and learn and grow together. So, this space is open to everybody, and it is a space where you can share your opinions, your perspectives. I'm only here sharing my own, and I know that is not the truth, only truth. There is many truths in this world, and I would love to hear yours in reflection of this book that we are reading together. And that book that we are reading today is called The Aquarian Gospel of Jesus the Christ. And if you read the title, we are starting off in chapter 3. And then we will move on into however many chapters that we are intuitively wanting to read together today. So if you want to learn more about the book itself, if you want to know more about the author and where the book comes from, I suggest you go back to last week and watch the video where we read chapters 1 and 2, because I go over the book, where it came from, what inspired it, and a little bit more background on that. So definitely I'll leave that in the description box below so that you can easily access that after this live or after you finish watching this video. So because of that, we're just going to dive right in and get into the reading. So the way that the chapters are set up is there's a chapter, there is a brief summary of what that chapter is going to talk about, and then this is the book itself. So I'm going to go ahead and start reading those. I'm going to read through the whole chapter because they're not very long. And then between each one, I'll just give a little bit of background based on my own knowledge, a little bit of insight that comes through as I'm reading. And if you want to chime in and share your own insights with each chapter, I definitely invite you to do so, because I would love for this to be a collaborative, collective conversation. So with that, we are at chapter 3, and the summary says, Birth of Jesus. Masters honor the child. The shepherds rejoice. Zacharias and Elizabeth visit Mary. Jesus is circumcised. The time was nearly due for Jesus to be born, and Mary longed to see Elizabeth, and she and Joseph turned their faces towards the Judean hills. And when upon their way they came to Bethlehem, the day was done, and they must tarry for the night. But Bethlehem was thronged with people going to Jerusalem. The inns and homes were filled with guests, and Joseph and his wife could find no place to rest but in a cave where animals were kept, and there they slept. At midnight came a cry, a child is born in yonder cave among the beasts, and lo, the promised Son of Man was born. And strangers took the little one and wrapped him in the dainty robes that Mary had prepared and laid him in the trough, from which the beasts of burden fed. 3 persons clad in snow-white robes came in and stood before the child and said, All strength, all wisdom, and all love be yours, Emmanuel. Now on the hills of Bethlehem were many flocks of sheep with shepherds guarding them. The shepherds were devout, were men of prayer, and they were waiting for a strong deliverer to come. And when the child of promise came, a man in snow-white robe appeared to them, and they fell back in fear. The man stood forth and said, Fear not. Behold, I bring you joyful news. At midnight in a cave in Bethlehem was born the prophet and the king that you have long been waiting for. And then the shepherds all were glad. They felt that all the hills were filled with messengers of light who said, All glory be to God on high, peace, peace on earth, goodwill to men. And then the shepherds came with haste to Bethlehem into the cave, that they might see and honor him whom men had called Emmanuel. Now when the morning came, a shepherdess whose home was near prepared a room for Mary Joseph and the child, and here they tarried many days. And Joseph sent a messenger in haste to Zacharias and Elizabeth to say, the child is born in Bethlehem. And Zacharias and Elizabeth took John and came to Bethlehem with words of cheer. And Mary and Elizabeth recounted all the wondrous things that had transpired. The people joined with them in praising God. According to the custom of the Jews, the child was circumcised, and when they asked, what will you call the child? The mother said, his name is Jesus, as the man of God declared. Chapter 3. So pretty much this is a very familiar story. If you are familiar with reading the New Testament, then you would already know that Jesus was born in a manger. We're taught that the inns were all full and they had no way to get back home that night. So they stayed in a cave and they were able to have Jesus be born at that time. What was interesting to me about this chapter is that, and honestly in the Bible too, whenever I would think about it, there were 3 men, and they called them wise men, who came and already knew that Jesus was born. And they knew so through the stars, because they were essentially astrologers. And when the star in the New Testament, when the star was in the sky, they recognized it. They knew it based on what they've already studied in the stars about Jesus coming. Again, if you remember from our last video, we spoke about how at that time, so many people knew of the prophecies. Like the prophecies were like the news, like everybody knew what was supposed to come. And some people knew it in different ways through the gifts that source God had given them. And these 3 wise men were known to be, in a way, diviners and astrologers, and they knew. And also, we know also from the New Testament when the shepherds, the shepherds had an angel appear to them, and the angel told them that the Savior that they have been waiting for, praying for so long had been born. And that is like one of the first answers to the prophecy. And he wasn't even talking yet. He wasn't even walking yet. He was just here, and they knew. So I think that's great. And I think it's beautiful that John was also there with him during his birth, and not that much older than him. So they were always very close, is what I'm learning as well. Trying to see if there's anything else that calls from this chapter. Pretty much. I did find it interesting that they also mention the people, the people in the snow white robes, which were the wise men, but also that there was a man in a snow white robe who appeared to them, and according to the New Testament, that was an angel. And sometimes I think about like the fact that, like in the last video, we were talking about how Gabriel appeared, and Gabriel is considered an archangel, which also kind of has like a hierarchy to it of understanding if we're really looking at it from the physical point of view. And like Gabriel appeared in person and was like very fearful looking. And then this man appears and they still fell back in fear. So these angels are like chilling in the physical in these like white robes, but they still look inhuman. And I think that's so interesting because I wonder, and if you have had an experience, like please share it in the comments, but I have not had an experience where I felt that an angel appeared to me in that kind of way. So I do wonder about that sometimes. Why are they always so like scary? But maybe that's for a reason. And the last part is, it shares that, according to the custom of the Jews, Jesus was circumcised. And I think that in some religions, circumcision is very heavily practiced, very much valued. And might be an argument that, Jesus was circumcised, so we need to be circumcised, or not me, but, the men need to be circumcised. And at the end of the day, Jesus was born in this culture. So he was still going to follow the customs of this culture and of this time, regardless of him being who he was. So I do think that's a fair point to keep in mind. We'll keep moving on. We'll move on to chapter 4. So chapter 4, consecration of Jesus. Mary offers sacrifices. Simeon and Anna prophesy. Anna is rebuked for worshiping the child. The family returns to Bethlehem. Oh, I like this chapter. Okay, so now, Mary took her son when he was 40 days of age up to the temple in Jerusalem, and he was consecrated by the priest. And then she offered purifying sacrifices for herself, according to the custom of the Jews, a lamb and 2 young turtle doves. A pious Jew named Simeon was in the temple serving God. From early youth, he had been looking for Emmanuel to come, and he had prayed to God that he might not depart until his eyes had seen Messiah in the flesh. And when he saw the infant Jesus, he rejoiced and said, I now am ready to depart in peace, for I have seen the King. And then he took the infant in his arms and said, Behold, this child will bring a sword upon my people, Israel, and all the world. But he will break the sword, and then the nations will learn war no more. The master's cross I see upon the forehead of this child, and he will conquer by this sign. And in the temple was a widow, 84 years of age, and she departed not, but night and day she worshipped God. And when she saw the infant Jesus, she exclaimed, Behold, Emmanuel. Behold, the signet cross of the Messiah on his brow. And then the woman knelt to worship him as God with us, Emmanuel. But one, a master, clothed in white, appeared and said, Good woman, stay, take heed to what you do. You may not worship man. This is idolatry. This child is man, the son of man, and worthy of all praise. You shall adore and worship God. Him only shall you serve. The woman rose and bowed her head in thankfulness and worshiped God. And Mary took the infant Jesus and returned to Bethlehem. Chapter 4. So I really love this chapter because I feel, and please, I just want to say also as a disclaimer, please don't ever take offense to anything that I'm saying. These are all my own opinions, and you're free to have your own truth and your own opinions as well. And that's the whole point of this space, is to be able to share those differences respectfully and with love. So I just want to say that before I get into this next part. But what I've learned from a lot of being around Christian people or Christian churches, they sometimes, in my opinion, fall into worshiping Jesus because he's believed to be the Son of God. And I always kind of felt off about that in a way, even in terms of like worship songs. We say like praise Jesus, and the worship is towards Jesus. And a lot of what has come out recently too has been in terms of race and these racial debates in terms of like what Jesus looked like, and the images that are given to us to pretty much worship and look to him as a savior. And what I love about this chapter is that one of those men in white robes appeared to this woman who was very godly. She prayed every day. She was always in the temple. She was very righteous. But she fell into seeing the man that they had been waiting for, the savior, the person that was prophesied over for generations. She even fell into falling onto her knees and worshiping him and giving her all of her praise to this child, this baby that was in Mary's hands. And what I feel like that can happen to anybody, and it can happen with a lot of things in any religion when it comes down to seeing a symbol or seeing certain things that are in front of us that are reflections of source. But when we ignore source and we ignore God, that's when it can get tricky, because if you're only worshiping Jesus, an image, a man, then that's where we can fall into certain ideals that were created by man about Jesus. Because at the end of the day, he still walked in this life as a physical vessel. But that doesn't mean that he didn't walk his life in as other vessels as well. And regardless how he looked or who he was, we still aren't supposed to worship this image. And I thought that was a pretty powerful revelation to have, because it had me really rethink idolatry and what idolatry really is, and how anything that takes you away from source can be an idol, even the Son of God, you know? So I just find this chapter to be very short, but very powerful, just from that one interaction that occurred. Anything else that I learned from this? You know, they were still going according to the custom of the Jews. And if you are Jewish and you happen to know why she took him to the temple after being 40 days of age, there's like some customs that I'm definitely not familiar with, but would love to learn more about as well, because I think that the days, the rituals and numbers of days, and the rituals and just some of the customs that they do are really interesting to me. I know some of the sacrifices and the reasonings behind them are found in the Old Testament. So I definitely would recommend, if that's something you're into, to look back into that. But yeah, if you have anything to share from that chapter in regards to Jewish custom, then please share that. But yes, they also said the prophecy is that, behold, this child will bring a sword upon my people Israel and all the world, and he will break the sword, and the nations will learn war no more. And I think that's so interesting, because a lot of people believed that after his sacrifice on the cross, that actually people believe his second coming is what's going to lead to war no more. But they already believed that his first coming was what was supposed to lead to that. And I find that interesting as well. Let's see, what did you say? In the beginning, we're told not to idolize Yeshua, as he is an example of how we should be. Like you said, he's a vessel of source God, but still man. Yes. And I think that's where also the discussion of like Christ consciousness comes in, because a lot of people believe now is the second coming of Christ, but it's not through one person. It's through this consciousness of like what was already shown to us in his first lifetime or this lifetime. And so like he was here as like an example, not necessarily like we have to be just like this, but like showing that like this duality like of love, and this duality of like like this duality of love, and this duality of, living life in this way, because he still was a man. He still was living according to the customs, but he lived righteously, and he lived what he was taught was the right way to live, as well as what he already innately knew in himself. So it's like, that's his walk, but we also have our own walk. So we're supposed to live as an example for others as well. And that's the God in us living here today and anytime. So I thank you for engaging. I love that. Thank you for sharing. I don't know if there's anything else you want to take from this chapter, but there is no peace without love. And you know what is so great that you said that, because this book really gets into we just need to vibrate love. No, that's real. And you know what I love about this book, because I already read some of the, got pretty into it. But when we get more into this book later, it really shows why Jesus was the actual expression of love. And they really go deep into that explanation. So I can't wait till we get to that. Let me move on to more chapters so we can get into that. Because I think there's like 180 chapters or something like that. We're only on chapter 5, so let's get to it. So the one thing before we move to chapter 5, though, I wanted to mention was that they also mentioned, and I don't know if this really will come up later, but they mentioned that he had a cross on his forehead. And I think that's really interesting too, because the signet cross, and I'm going to look that up and leave in the description what a signet cross is after this, because I want to look into that. But the signet cross was seen upon the forehead of this child. And I always think that like things on the forehead are so interesting, because it is in regards to the third eye. But also when you look at some of the stories that talk about Cain, I don't know if it's some of the stories in the Apocrypha or if it actually mentions it in the Old Testament, but in the stories of Cain and his descendants had a mark on, oh yeah, it is mentioned. They had a mark of Cain also, because God protected Cain from death through that mark. So I always think that it's also interesting that the forehead, the third eye, this area is like also a symbol for, like, in the physical, for people to recognize like these ancient DNAs, I guess. I don't know. It's interesting. Something I want to dive into if anybody wants to share something about that. But we'll move on. Chapter 5. Should have brought some water in here because I'm reading and talking, but it's okay. Chapter 5. 3 magician priests honor Jesus. Herod is alarmed, calls a council of the Jews, is told that prophets had foretold the coming of a king. Herod resolves to kill the child. Mary and Joseph take Jesus and flee into Egypt. Beyond the river Euphrates, the Magians lived, and they were wise, could read the language of the stars, and they divined that a master soul, was born. They saw his star above Jerusalem. I guess I skipped ahead already, because this is where the wise men come in. And there were 3 among the Magian priests who longed to see the master of the coming age. And they took costly gifts and hastened to the west in search of him, the newborn king, that they might honor him. And one took gold, the symbol of nobility, another myrrh, the symbol of dominion and of power. Gum, thus, the other took the symbol of the wisdom of the sage. Now, when the Magians reached Jerusalem, the people were amazed and wondered who they were and why they came. And when they asked, "Where is the child that has been born a king?" the very throne of Herod seemed to shake. And Herod sent a courtier forth to bring the Magians to his court. And when they came, they asked again, "Where is the newborn king?" And then they said, "While yet beyond the Euphrates, we saw his star arise, and we have come to honor him." And Herod blanched with fear. He thought perhaps the priests were plotting to restore the kingdom of the Jews. And so he said within himself, "I will know more about this child that has been born a king." And so he told the Magian priests to tarry in the city for a while, and he would tell them all about the king. He called in council all the Jewish masters of the law and asked, "What have the Jewish prophets said concerning such a one?" The Jewish masters answered him and said, "The prophets long ago foretold that one would come to rule the tribes of Israel, that this Messiah would be born in Bethlehem." They said, the prophet Micah wrote, "O Bethlehem, Judea, a little place among the Judean hills, yet out of you will one come forth to rule my people Israel. Ye, one who lived in olden times, in very ancient days." Then Herod called the Magian priests again and told them what the masters of the Jewish law had said. And then he sent them on the way to Bethlehem. He said, "Go search, and if you find the child that has been born a king, Return and tell me all that I may go and honor him." The Magians went their way and found the child with Mary in the shepherd's home. They honored him, bestowed upon him precious gifts, and gave him gold, gum, thus, and myrrh. These Magian priests could read the hearts of men. They read the wickedness of Herod's heart and knew that he had sworn to kill the newborn king. And so they told the secret to the parents of the child and bid them flee beyond the reach of harm. And then the priests went on their homeward way. They went not through Jerusalem. And Joseph took the infant Jesus and his mother in the night and fled to Egypt land. And with Elihu and Salome in ancient Zoan, they abode. So here's where we're getting into some of the newer teachings. Chapter 5. This is where we're getting into the newer teachings of what Mary was learning during Jesus's time of being a child, and then some of the things that she probably taught him growing up that was outside of the Jewish customs that they already knew. So from chapter 5, please feel free to share whatever you brought or got from that chapter. But one of the main things I noticed is, and maybe it's just a language difference, but gum, thus, and incense in the New Testament, they would talk about the gift being of incense. But in this one, they talk about gum, thus, which is the symbol of the wisdom of the sage. So he was given things that were symbols of certain energies that Jesus was meant to embody, Yeshua was meant to embody. So he was given a symbol of nobility, which is gold, the symbol of dominion and power through myrrh, and then the symbol of wisdom of the sage through the gum, thus. So I think that's another way to kind of prophesy over this child and say, like, this is what he's going to embody in his lifetime. And I think that's beautiful. Also, again, these wise men were diviners. They were astrologers. And they also mentioned that they knew not just that Jesus was born and they weren't even in the same city. They knew that Herod, the king at that time, who wasn't Jewish, I don't believe, was actually, I'm going to look up Herod, King Herod, but he also, they knew his heart. They said they knew the wickedness of this man. Now, I want to know how they knew that, because how do you discern the heart of a person like that, especially a king, and just know that he already had the intent to kill the Messiah? That's so interesting. They might have been seers as well. They might have had premonitions about his intent. They might have had dreams. I don't know, but they said that they knew. And because they knew, they were able to warn Mary and Joseph to flee, and they fled to Egypt, where I believe a lot of the Egyptian teachings is what's going to come in next. But I just wanted to look at Herod. He was a Roman Jewish king of the kingdom of Judea. And also, just remember that in the description, I'm also going to leave a map of Palestine at that time that has all these countries that are mentioned, so that you can kind of see where the wise men avoided, because they said they didn't go back through Jerusalem because Herod was trying to already like mess with them, but they already discerned his intent. And you can also see where Egypt is at that time and where Judea is and Bethlehem is at that time, and see where they traveled on foot to get from one place to another in order to ensure that Yeshua stayed alive. So that is where chapter 5 ends. We'll move on to chapter 6. And because I don't think there's anything else that I want to mention. Yeah. Chapter 6. Oh yeah, we'll end after chapter 6 because it'll get into a new section, and we'll start that section next week. So chapter 6, Herod learns of the mission of John. The infants of Bethlehem are massacred by Herod's order. Elizabeth escapes with John. Because Zacharias cannot tell where his son is hidden, he is murdered. Herod dies. That's the summary of this chapter. Also, from the last chapter, I thought it was interesting that Herod brought in like Jewish wise men also, or Jewish priests, to share what the prophecy was, because he didn't even know that this king was coming to rule, and now he did. And so his intent was to stay as king. He didn't want it to be taken over by any baby, especially one that all the Jewish people would very willingly follow because of that prophecy. So some insight into this next chapter. Now, when the Magian priests did not return to tell him of the child that had been born a king, King Herod was enraged. And then his courtiers told of another child in Bethlehem, one born to go before and to prepare the people to receive the king. This angered more and more the king. He called his guards and bid them go to Bethlehem and slay the infant John, as well as Jesus, who was born to be a king. He said, let no mistake be made, and that you may be sure to slay these claimants to my throne. Slay all the male children in the town, not yet 2 years of age. The guards went forth and did as Herod bade them do. Elizabeth knew not that Herod sought to slay her son, and she and John were yet in Bethlehem. But when she knew, she took the infant John and hastened to the hills. The murderous guards were near. They pressed upon her hard, and then she knew the secret caves in all the hills, and into one she ran and hid herself and John until the guards were gone. Their cruel task was done. The guards returned and told the story to the king. They said, we know that we have slain the infant king, but John, his harbinger, we could not find. The king was angry with his guards because they failed to slay the infant John. He sent them to the tower in chains. And other guards were sent to Zacharias, father of the harbinger, while he was serving in the holy place, to say, the king demands that you should tell where is your son. But Zacharias did not know, and he replied, I am a minister of God, a servant in the holy place. How can I know where they have taken him? And when the guards returned and told the king what Zacharias said, he was enraged and said, my guards, go back and tell that wily priest that he is in my hands, that if he does not tell the truth, does not reveal the hiding place of John, his son, then he shall die. The guards went back and told the priest just what the king had said. And Zacharias said, I can, but give my life for truth. And if the king does shed my blood, the Lord will save my soul. The guards again returned and told the king what Zacharias said. Now Zacharias stood before the altar in the holy place, enraged in prayer. Zacharias stood before the altar in the holy place and engaged in prayer. My mistake. A guard approached and with a dagger thrust him through. He fell and died before the curtain of the sanctuary of the Lord. And when the hour of salutation came, for Zacharias daily blessed the priests, he did not come. And after waiting long, the priest went to the holy place and found the body of the dead. And there was grief, deep grief in all the land. Now Herod sat upon his throne. He did not seem to move. His courtiers came. The king was dead. His sons reigned in his stead. Crazy chapter. So pretty much we see another display of monarchy and power. And he was not happy to hear this prophecy over these children, Yeshua, Jesus, and John the Baptist. And they both were prophesied over. They both had their roles in the saving of the Jewish people. And Herod knew that his throne was a little bit shaky, and he took it upon himself to just slaughter all the children that were two, all the male children that were two in the land. And I think this is wild because this is not the first time you see that happen in the Bible. People love to talk about Egypt and how the Pharaoh slayed all the children, and Herod did the same. This is like something they just love to do. It's like if they don't like you, they don't want you to threaten their place of power, they just got rid of you, and their guards just let it be. Like whatever they said was done, and that was what happened. But like you just said, you can't stop the light, and they were still saved. They still managed to flee to Egypt because the wise men already warned Mary and Joseph. And then as Elizabeth learns, she's saved. And Zacharias, unfortunately, is killed in the name of truth. because he did not know that. First of all, they didn't even know that Herod was after their son. So Zacharias is over here like, well, dang, like, I don't even know where my own son is. And now you're over here threatening me. And that led to his death. And it's unfortunate, but he still was in prayer. He still had faith. And he probably was praying for the protection of John. And Elizabeth knew the caves and was able to escape. And that's how that ended. And honestly, this next section, just to give you some background into next week's readings, we're on section 3, and they're going to be talking about the education of Mary and Elizabeth in Zoan, which is a place in Egypt. So I'm excited to get into that because what we're going to be learning is that Mary and Elizabeth were given like esoteric teachings, and they were given, like what they like to call mystery school studies in a way. And they were taught, also what I like about this book is they mention, like in chapter 5, they mention that there was a shepherdess, and they also like to bring about the stories of the women. And that's something I really love about this book, because we're going to get into really how powerful and intelligent and spiritual Mary and Elizabeth were, and how that led to who Yeshua and John became as men and what we know them to be in the New Testament. So I really like that part of it. Sorry to end the chapters on like a not so good note, but it's a nice reminder to know too that even if you are living a good life, there is sometimes going to be opposition to that light. And their faith and their knowing of their soul, like Zacharias knew his soul would be saved even if his physical life was taken from him. That type of faith is very strong. And somehow that happened, and Herod ended up dead that same day, that same time that he chose to engage in that, and the karma of that situation led to his own ending of his throne. It was taken from him. Source took it. And so it's just a reminder that of the law of karma, but also that there is always a plan and there's always a reason for everything. And yeah, that's what I learned. I would love to hear what you learned from today. If you just made it to the live now or are listening to this later, please leave in the comments any revelations that you receive from this story. Share it with me if you like it. Please like the video if you do. Share it with your friends. We can make this a little Sunday spiritual Sunday, like soulful Sunday sessions. Would love to hear more insight from y'all. But thank you for joining me today, and I hope you have a beautiful rest of your Sunday, and really pray about anything that came up for you, because Source is going to have the answer for you for sure. So much love to you, and peace. Have a beautiful day.